Hello, and welcome to this episode of Optimal Game State. Today, we're continuing our Warcry Hero series with the Death faction. Compared to the other Grand Alliances, the Death faction is quite small, having only 4 warbands in total, but those warbands are quite diverse, giving a lot of options. The Flesh Eater courts have super cheap and fast ghouls, along with terrifying flyers like the Crypt Infernal. The Nighthaunts are an entire faction of flyers, including the cheapest flyer in the game, the Chain Rasp. The Ossiarch Bone Reapers are a relatively new addition, with constructs made from bone rather than normal undead. And lastly, we have the Soulblight Gravelords, a classic mix of vampires and shambling hordes. As we're dealing with a mere 45 heroes, the plots are a little chunkier with less spread. Damage has a typical peak at 5 and another at 7, but unlike Order and Chaos, there's nothing in the 8 to 12 categories. Wounds peak at 20, but there are almost as many 25 and 30 wound heroes. Movement is very surprising. The other Grand Alliances are mostly 4 move, and we might have expected, based on the typical Death fighter, a lot of move 3 units, but instead we have the majority of these heroes at move 6. A lot of this of course is coming from the Nighthaunt leaders, who are all very new. For strength and toughness, we're seeing the usual 4 and 4. Notably, there's no toughness or strength values of 6. Here we have the average damage versus toughness 4 plot, and with so few heroes to look at, we can mark almost all of them clearly enough. There are immediately some standouts. The Cryptcast Courtier, the White King, and the Aberrant Archregent are all punching well above their weight. Underneath the Cryptcast is a Mortek Hecatus with the exact same points and damage, but move 3. No crazy 10 plus fighters here, so we're going to have to scale back our expectations, especially compared to the Chaos Heroes. And here we have our first top 5, with a range of fighters all capping out at 7.33 damage. Along with that, we're getting some quite interesting options. The slowest fighter here is move 5, so we're not going to have to worry about speed. These were sub-sorted into damage per points, so the cheapest models are coming up first. That means we start with the Aberrant Archregent, relatively cheap at 205 points, decent damage, especially against T3 targets, a great move of 5, and T4 with 25 wounds, so a solid all-rounder. He does have a notable double Unnatural Vitality, which allows him to heal, so at 25 wounds he can take some hits, then an easy double while in combat will get him some wounds back. He also has a fantastic but slightly controversial movement ability, which I'll talk about later. Next up we have the Crypthaunt Courtier, also from the Flesh Eater courts. 45 more points, move is up to 6, and wounds go to 36. The Unnatural Vitality is gone, but all Flesh Eater court have a on-kill version that's also a double, Feeding Frenzy. The Courtier also has an interesting double that will add 2 attacks for the rest of the turn, but it can only be used when within 6 inches of a Flesh Eater King, either the Archregent or the cheaper but similar Abhorrent Ghoul King. In third place, we have the Liege Cavelos from the Ossiarch Bone Reapers. This is a mounted hero, so pretty fast at 8 move, but with all the drawbacks of being mounted. No climbing without stairs, no getting through doors or arches. Generally, the Bone Reapers do poorly in this review, but they do have access to a double that increases their hit and crit damage by 1 for the rest of the turn, which might be impacting their general damage numbers. Along with this, the Cavelos has one of my favourite types of ability. Endless Duty is a double, giving a bonus move or attack after a kill. All the Ossiarch leaders also have access to a movement ability, a triple Unstoppable Advance. It only gives move equal to half the value, which is kind of meh, but it applies to all fighters in the same battle group, so hammer, dagger or shield, regardless of where they might be. In 4th place, and remember this is the same damage as number 1, just a little costlier, we have the White King on Skeletal Steed. Another mounted character, this fighter also has a reach of 2, extending his threat range and forcing the opponent to spend an action if they want to attack back. He does have a double that increases crit damage by half the value. At best, this increases average damage by 2, while the Universal Double Onslaught increases it by 1.84, so unless you've got a double 5 or 6, this ability is a trap. As a hero from the Soulblight Gravelords, he also has a crazy good ability to bring fighters back from the dead, which we'll talk about a bit later. Last, but certainly not least, we have the Crypt Infernal Courtier. This is a move 10 flyer doing max damage for the faction. The Agile Rune Mark opens up 2 abilities. One is a double, which increases strength by 1. Doesn't really mean much unless you're attacking a toughness 5 fighter, but it also means any crit will root the target. As the Infernal has 4 dice, that's essentially a 30% chance of rooting the target. Unfortunately, you'll need to use the ability before you try to kill the target, so often it will be wasted. We don't have any 3 move fighters in this list, so the next list is straight to damage efficiency, and these are mostly cheaper versions of the previous list. The Cryptcast Courtier is similar to the Crypthaunter Courtier, but loses the Chosen of the King double and has lower stats overall. The White King is almost the same as the mounted version, just unmounted. Cryptghast is like the courtier, but cheaper again, losing 4 wounds and 1 strength. The Mortek Hecatas is kind of new, but the Bulwark ability really adds nothing of value, so he's all stats. Decent damage for 105 points, with an impressive 5 toughness, but does have move 3. Last up we have the Abhorrent Archregent, who was top of the previous list. If we take out the move 3 characters, we also get the Slasher Crone, who is our first Nighthaunt hero. Damage is decent at 5 for 165 points, and this is a move 6 fly hero. The Nighthaunt have a number of interesting abilities, but the one unique to this hero is the triple Harrowing Shriek, which is a root effect. Next up we're looking at some wounds. As expected, we've got a pretty tight range, where the more points you spend, the more wounds you get. We do have a few notable fighters at the top of that band. The Mortek Hecatas and the White King, unsurprisingly with their move 3, make up for it with a lot of wounds. In this list I've tried to do some balancing between wounds and damage versus points, but as you can see we're back to familiar faces. And if we take out the 2 move 3 characters, we'll see 2 more familiar faces. So while the damage isn't super high for these heroes, they are well rounded with great move, decent damage and good survivability. Let's look at the flyers. Oh, we've already seen a few. As before, we're looking for problem solvers, and fast flyers typically are able to get into position to get the job done fast. At the top of the list we have the Crypt Infernal Courtier. This is the chunkiest of the death heroes at 36 wounds, and with move 10 and fly, we'll be able to get in and take care of most problems. I've already mentioned the 2 doubles, which are a bit situational to be fair. There are also 2 triples. Death Scream does target everyone in 8 inches, but only does damage on a 5 or 6, doing 1 damage on a 5 and ability dice value on 6. With enough dice you might be able to get some value out of it, but often you'll be better off spending your triple elsewhere. The second triple, Bringer of Death, is a movement ability that we'll look at later. Only slightly cheaper, we have the Varghul Courtier. A little less move at 8, but still would fly. Similarly, damage average of 7 is a little down, but still pretty good. The doubles are the same, but if you have a triple free, you get to use the amazing, terrifying Frenzy. It is only for the next attack, but as the Varghul only has 3 dice, it is an extra attack worth of dice. So that brings a single attack to 14 average damage, meaning you can reliably snack on a chaff model. If you're already in melee and getting 2 actions anyway, then the double onslaught is going to get you 2 dice rather than the 3, which is pretty close. But the option for that burst damage makes this a quite interesting fighter. Next up we have the Vampire Lord, which I have to admit I was surprised to see is actually a flyer. The terrifying rune mark opens up these 2 triples, Thirst for Blood, which lets you heal after killing a target. Unfortunately, the heal is based on the ability's values, which for a triple can be unreliable, but it is doubled, which is very nice. If you fail to kill the target, you can spend that triple on Call the Crimson Feast instead, which adds 1 dice to the attacks of friendly fighters nearby. As with the Flesh Eater Court, there's one additional ability which all Soulblight Gravelords have, which I'm going to hold off till later because it's worth giving a section to itself. Last in the shortlist, we have the Slasher Crone, much cheaper at 165 points, but still moves 6 fly with 5 average damage, which is quite good. Not going to be a problem solver all by yourself, but will get some work done. At 15 wounds, might be a little bit vulnerable. Now in this case there are 2 abilities I want to talk about later. One is a net-like effect and the other is a resurrection. Rest assured, there's a lot more to this hero. Looking at damage efficiency, we can see the same names appearing in our move 5 list. It's only once we move up to move 10 that we start seeing new appearances. The Fellbats are a troll unit, so they aren't competing with the others. The Dreadblade Harrow is an interesting addition, around the same price as a Vampire Lord, but with around 1 less average damage. It has a very interesting teleport ability for triple, and as with the Slasher Crone, gives access to the Nighthaunt's resurrection ability. In 5th place we have the Knight of Shrouds on Ethereal Steed. This was the go-to last edition, but the Dreadblade Harrow has pushed ahead. On stats alone, you get to pay 35 points for just 3 wounds. You also trade a teleport for a double that heals and a quad that does some AoE damage. The heal ability is quite good though. Rather than worrying about dice value to heal wounds equal to the damage the Knight of Shrouds did during the activation, which at 5.33 average damage could be big. The quad obviously is problematic being a quad, but is actually quite reliable damage, doing the ability dice value and damage to all enemy fighters within 3 inches. A Rampage would be another move and attack, but Reap Like Corn could be better if it's a high dice value and if you have 2 or more targets getting hit. Last up we have the Hellwraith. Added to the list because there were only 6 fighters in this category. With only 3.33 damage on average, this is pretty poor. The ability opened up with the Destroy rune mark turns hits into crits, but with strength 3, even getting the hits is going to be tough. The next section I normally look at is the ranged fighters, and honestly we're not expecting a lot. I have a tendency to undervalue ranged fighters, but it's good to remember that these fighters can often attack at range twice, where melee models would have to move in and attack, so mentally doubling the damage isn't unreasonable. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately depending on your perspective, you cannot target hostiles in melee with a friendly, so a good way to avoid range attacks is to get stuck in. There are a few caster heroes. Pretty much all the options have the same stat line. Average damage of 3 at max range 7, with the Cruel Cast Crusader as the only outlier at 4 damage and 10 range. 3 of these heroes are from the Ossiarchs, which I guess reflects the team of support casters backing up their line troops and constructs. The Necromancer has a very cool double ability that lets him assign damage to a friendly minion to heal himself equal to the value of the ability. He also has a quad that gives a bonus move or attack to nearby minions up to the value of the ability. As a quad, getting good numbers in this is tricky, but a quad where you get 3 or more extra activations could be great value. The Ossiarchs all have various abilities, which aren't really worth noting. All the Ossiarch leaders do have a bonus move ability for the battle group. It is a triple, and the bonus is equal to half the value, so it's a little tricky to use, but could be very good. Similarly, the Cruel Cast Crusader doesn't have any extra rule marks beyond Fly and Hero, so his ability selection is the same as the other Nighthaunt heroes. Alright, next up we have Thralls. In a match play warband, you can have up to 3 Thralls and they do not conflict with your 3 heroes. Thralls are part of your Grand Alliance, so any death warbands can take these. For death, there are just 2, the Direwolf and the Fellbat. Both share the same reaction ability, which they can trigger if an enemy comes close to one of your heroes. Using reaction takes up an action, but this reaction gives a move and attack, so you're up an action. While the average 2 or 3 from these Thralls is unlikely to kill anything before they can then attack, you will get to attack with the Thrall in a later activation, so it is very efficient. Importantly, none of this is costing you dice. Despite appearances, neither of these are considered beasts, presumably due to their magical nature. This means you can go through closed doors and importantly can carry treasure. The Direwolf is super fast at 8, but also has a bonus move as a double if they're within 6 inches of a target. It's very comparable to the Crypt Ghouls from the Flesh Eater Court, who cost 55, but the Direwolf is getting 3 extra move, 2 extra wounds, and importantly that reaction for those 30 points. The Fellbat on the other hand is faster, can fly, hits harder, and has a little more health. That's an extra 45 for all that though, so the Direwolf is definitely more efficient. The ability is a triple, which we don't always have spare, and it does get an extra attack, so that's an extra 3 damage. I always like to compare these to Onslaught, as the Fellbats roll 3 dice per attack. That's pretty easy. So the average extra damage is 1 better than an Onslaught when you've got 2 attacks. I have to admit, I love the models for the Direwolf, which are probably going to sway me in that direction. 3 Direwolves will cost me 255, which is about the same as 2 Fellbats at 260. I lose out on the 2 move, 2 wounds and fly, but I gain an extra activation for my warband. Next up, we're going to look at some of the abilities, and see what fighters can use them rather than the other way around. As you'll have noticed, there are a couple of very interesting abilities that are open to any hero within the warbands. There's one for Flesh Eater Court, one for Nighthaunts, and one for Soulblight Gravelords. I'd be tempted to try bring one from each just because of this. We've already talked about the Dreadblade Harrow, decent damage, move 10, fly. For a triple you get teleport. You do have to be 3 inches away from anyone, and you have to end up 5 inches away from any enemies, but that's not too bad. Worst case scenario, you disengage as a first action, then teleport, then the second action moves you into combat with the target, who can literally be anywhere on the board. While Fly 10 is going to already give you a lot of options on the table, a teleport is always handy to have. Next in the Nighthaunts, we have the Slasher Crone. Much cheaper, but still with damage close to the Dreadblade. The triple she brings is Harrowing Shriek, a 3+ net effect. This is the most reliable net for death, so even as a triple it's worth keeping in mind. Both of these are part of the Nighthaunts, and any of the Nighthaunts hero can use this triple, which will allow you to take a friendly fighter that has already been killed and put them back on the board, reducing the total wounds by whatever the ability was. It should be noted that wounds never exceed the total wound total, so if a fighter has 1 wound left and takes 20 damage, they'll only end up taking 1 of that 20, with the remaining 19 discarded. I'd imagine from turn 3 onwards, this is probably the ability you'll want to use the most. Very frustrating to play against, as you need to keep killing the same things over and over. Speaking of which, the Soulblight Gravelords have a similar ability. In this case it only works on Soulblight minions, but it does remove all wounds from them. The model of choice is the Graveguard with the Great White Blade, which is one of the most efficient damage fighters in the game, and the best bang for your buck with this ability. These 2 abilities combined are amazing, and probably should be what you bank your wild dice for. A lot of warbands, I suspect, will be using the Graveguard as their core unit. They are slow, but they're cheap with 5 average damage on hit, so they're very dangerous. The Vampire Lord is a great all-rounder for this ability, while the Necromancer is the cheapest hero with this ability. To really use it, you need to be in faction, so while you're likely to bring a Nighthaunt hero for their ability, the Soulblight Gravelords keep their own. Another great option for the Soulblight hero is the White King. I love the new model from Warhammer Underworld's Gnarlwood box. In addition to summoning back Graveguard, he has a great double. As each point increase is about 2 damage per activation, even a double 1 is better than getting an extra attack from Onslaught. This means the White King can be super high damage model when you need him to be. Last up, we have the triple that any of the Flesh Eater courts can use. This adds the value of the triple to the move characteristic of friendly fighters within 6 inches. This is the same ability as the Order heroes have with the Cities of Sigmar, and it's been shown to be incredibly powerful there. There are some tricks to using this. First, you want to make sure that you stay within 6 inches of all of your fighters, so if your Crypt Infernal is shepherding some slow undead, you don't want to zoom across the board 20 inches straight away. You might be better off using a wait as your first action, then the Shambling Undead can get their boost for both of their activations, moving no more than 6 inches in the first move. And then when you activate the Crypt Infernal next, he'll have his normal 10 plus the triple ability bonus. This ability is a little controversial because it does say to round up, even though there's no division by 2. Presumably this is a error and we'll see it updated in a future FAQ. But for the time being, just play it as is and ignore the rounding up part. The cheapest option for a Flesh Eater Court's hero is the Cryptghast at a bargain 105. Damage is fine for the points, and he's got a nice move of 5 to go along with it. As I talked about with the Order heroes, having a ranged ability like this can be quite nice, but that's not actually an option for this warband. And there we have it. Death is a relatively small Grand Alliance, but they have some really fantastic fighters in their range. One thing I should note is how great the Flesh Eater Court Start Collecting box is. It has a monster, which we haven't covered here, but really is fantastic, 10 Crypt Ghouls and 3 Crypt Flayers. The monster's rider can be kept separate and is an Abhorrent Ghoul King. The 3 Crypt Flayers can be built in multiple options, with and without wings, and with various options to distinguish Infernals and Courtiers. The Crypt Ghouls form the core of the Flesh Eater Court warband, being fantastic value and very fast. You get 10 in this box, and one can be made into a Cryptghast Courtier, so you've got a ton of options. There are also lots of other things in the Death faction that are relatively cheap to pick up, or you might already have. You can see the Sons of Velmorn, which you'll have if you pick up the new Gnarlwood box for Warhammer Underworlds. These give you a fantastic looking Lich King, along with a number of models that you could use as Graveguard. Unfortunately, only one has a 2-hander for the White Blade, but your opponent might be fine with you proxying them, or you can just run them straight as is. They'll still pack plenty of punch anyway. Back right, I have Kato STR, the Hollow King, because there are a ton of options for you to pick up your Vampire Lords. The Dreadblade Harrows are easy to build models, so they should be cheap enough to go pick up, while the Doggos in the front are just the goodest boys ever. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Each week I put up a new video talking about one of Games Workshop's specialist games. The goal is always to try and make the best possible 2-player experience. If this is something you'd find interesting, please subscribe to the channel and comment to let me know what you'd like to see in future.